Have you ever wondered why, in the middle of one of the most successful seasons of his entire ministry, Jesus consistently disappears into the dark? After healing an entire city or miraculously feeding thousands of people, he doesn't stay with the electrified crowds. Instead, he retreats to a solitary mountain in the middle of the night to pray. He isn't going into the dark simply to rest or escape the demands of the people. That quiet, solitary place in the dark is actually the very source where his ministry comes from. In this video, we are going to uncover the truth behind Jesus' entirely sleepless nights of prayer. What did he actually hear in that silence? And why was the Father's silence in the Garden of Gethsemane the exact presence he needed to walk toward the cross?
Somewhere on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, in the hours between 3 and 6 in the morning, there is a man alone on a mountain. Below him, on the water, a boat full of disciples is fighting a storm they did not expect. Behind him, scattered across the hillside, 5,000 families are settling in after the most extraordinary meal any of them have ever eaten. The city of Capernaum, 3 miles south, is still buzzing with the memory of the evening before, the crowd that gathered at sunset, the sick who came and were healed, the night that felt like the beginning of something the world had been waiting for. And Jesus is alone on a mountain in the dark, praying. He has been there since he sent the crowd away. He will be there until the 4th watch of the night, until the sky is just beginning to think about changing. And when he finally comes down from that mountain, he will do something that defies every law of physics and every expectation of what a human body can do. He will walk on the water. We will get there. But first, why the mountain? Why the night? Why, in the middle of one of the most successful seasons of his entire ministry, does Jesus consistently disappear into the dark when everyone else is looking for him? Because he knows something about the silence that we have mostly forgotten. This is the story of why Jesus prayed at night, and what he heard there, and why it matters for the way you pray. The evening in Capernaum has been extraordinary. Mark records it with the kind of specificity that suggests an eyewitness, Simon Peter most likely, who was there and who later told Mark everything he knew. Jesus had been teaching in the synagogue, and after the service, he went to Simon Peter's house. Simon's mother-in-law was sick with a fever. He takes her hand. The fever leaves. By the time the sun goes down, the whole city has gathered at the door. The whole city. Mark is not exaggerating for effect. He means it literally. The entire population of Capernaum, a fishing town of perhaps 1,500 people, has gathered outside a single house because word has moved through the streets the way word moves in small towns when something unprecedented happens. And Jesus heals them. Many of them. He drives out demons. He does it until there is no one left to heal, until the crowd has been tended to, until the evening has become very late. And then, while the city is still processing what it has just witnessed, while the disciples are presumably exhausted and asleep, while every reasonable argument says that the momentum requires staying close and being present for the morning when the questions and the needs will be even greater, Jesus gets up. Mark 1:35. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. While it was still dark, he does not wait for the dawn. He does not sleep until a reasonable hour and then spend the first part of the morning in quiet reflection. He gets up in the middle of the night, or rather, before the night has ended, and he leaves, alone, to a solitary place, and he prays there in the dark while the city sleeps and the disciples do not yet know he is gone. Simon Peter finds him eventually, and the report he brings is exactly what you would expect from a disciple who has watched the evening unfold and cannot understand why anyone would leave it. Everyone is searching for you. The implication is clear. The moment is there for the taking. The city wants more. The ministry is building. The crowds are gathering, and the opportunity is enormous. And the man everyone is searching for is alone, on a hillside in the dark. He knows, and he stays. Luke tells us this was not a one-time occurrence. The Greek word he uses in Luke 5:16 is hyperchoron, withdrawing, retreating, pulling back. And the tense of the verb is a continuous imperfect, which in Greek means this is not describing a single event, but a persistent, repeated pattern. He often withdrew. Continuously, it was what he did. After the healings, after the teachings, after the moments when the crowds pressed in and the demands multiplied and the energy of public ministry reached its highest pitch, he withdrew to lonely places and prayed. Here is what most people miss about this. The withdrawal is not rest. It is not recuperation in the way we think of it, a quiet evening to recover before the next day's work. He's not going into the dark to recharge the way a phone charges overnight. He is going into the dark to receive something, to see something, to hear something that cannot be heard in the noise of the day, that cannot come through the clamor of the crowd, or the urgent questions of the disciples, or the accumulated press of human need that surrounds him every waking hour. The solitary place in the dark is not where Jesus escapes the ministry. It is where the ministry comes from. But the most striking of all the night prayers in the Gospels, before we get to the mountain after the 5,000, before we get to Gethsemane, is a night prayer so brief that it is easy to read past it entirely. Luke 6:12. Jesus went out to a mountain to pray and spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him and chose 12 of them. The Greek word Luke uses for what Jesus did that night is dianiktereon. It is a compound verb that appears exactly once in the entire New Testament, here and nowhere else. Luke reaches for a word that does not get used anywhere else in the canon, specifically to describe what Jesus does the night before he names the 12. It means to pass the night through, to spend the whole night completely without sleeping. He is awake all night, praying about 12 names. Stay with me, because what those 12 names include matters enormously for what this night means. One of the 12 is Judas. Not Judas the loyal one who will falter for a season and be restored. That is Peter, whose name will be announced at dawn alongside Judas's. Judas Iscariot, who will betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, who will kiss him in a garden and hand him to soldiers, who will go out and hang himself before the crucifixion is finished. Jesus knew. He knew it when he went up the mountain the night before. He spent the entire night, every hour of it, the whole dark stretch from evening to dawn, in prayer. And when the sun came up, he came down and named Judas, not in spite of the prayer, after it. Whatever he heard in that night of prayer, whatever conversation happened on that mountain in the dark between the Son and the Father, who also knew, it did not produce a different name at dawn. It produced the courage to speak the name that was always going to be spoken, to choose the one who would betray him with full knowledge after a full night of communion with the Father. This is what the night prayer does that the day cannot. It does not change the hard thing. It gives you the capacity to walk into it with your eyes open. Now we come to the night I told you about at the beginning. The day has been unlike any other in the ministry so far. It started with the news that John the Baptist was dead, Herod's birthday, a dancing girl, a promise made in front of guests, a head on a platter. Jesus withdraws when he hears it. He takes a boat across the water, trying to find a solitary place to grieve. The crowd follows on foot around the shoreline and meets him when he lands. He sees them and has compassion on them and spends the rest of the day teaching and healing until the afternoon is gone and the disciples come to him with the practical problem that has been building since morning. There are 5,000 men here, plus women, plus children. The math is somewhere north of 10,000 people. It is late. They are hungry. And the disciples have found, between all of them, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. You know what happens next. Jesus takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, gives it to the disciples to distribute. And somehow, in a way that none of the gospel writers attempt to explain, because explanation would only diminish it, 5 loaves and 2 fish feed 10,000 people until they cannot eat any more, with 12 baskets of fragments left over. 1 basket for each of the 12 disciples who thought there was not enough. The crowd is electrified. John's gospel adds the detail that the other 3 writers leave out. When the people saw the sign he had performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." And then, John writes, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. By force. They did not want to simply crown him, they wanted to take him, to compel him into the role they had decided he should fill. The momentum of the miracle has become a pressure, and the pressure has become a plan, and the plan is moving toward Jesus with the full weight of a crowd that has just watched something impossible happen and has decided it knows exactly what that means. And Jesus is gone. He has dismissed the disciples, sending them ahead in a boat across the water toward Bethsaida. He has sent the crowd away, and then, alone on a hillside above the darkening Sea of Galilee, with the crowd's plans evaporating behind him and his disciples pulling oars somewhere out in the dark ahead of him, he prays. He stays there from the evening until the fourth watch of the night. The fourth watch runs from 3 in the morning to 6, which means Jesus has been alone on that mountain praying for somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. While his disciples fought a wind that Matthew describes as enantios directly against them, the boat making almost no progress, the disciples straining at the oars in the middle of the lake in the dark. And now this is where the open loop from the beginning of this video closes. Because what happens next does not happen because Jesus finishes his prayer and decides to go check on the disciples. It does not happen because he looks out from the mountain and sees the storm and springs into action. What happens next flows directly, organically, inevitably out of what has been happening on that mountain for the last 6 to 9 hours. He walks down to the water's edge, and he walks across it. Pay attention to the sequence. The prayer does not come after the miracle. The prayer comes before it. The impossible thing does not produce the need for prayer. The prayer produces the impossible thing. What Jesus has been doing on that mountain in the dark is not preparation for ministry. It is the source of it. He does not come down from the mountain having figured out a plan. He comes down from the mountain carrying something he received up there. And what he carries is sufficient for anything the water can demand of him. He came down and walked on the water and spoke a word that stopped a storm and pulled a sinking disciple out of the sea and left 12 men in a boat worshiping him. All of it, out of a night alone on a mountain. And this is where it gets remarkable, because this is not the only time that what happens during a night of prayer on a mountain changes everything. A few chapters later in Luke, Jesus takes Peter and James and John up another mountain to pray. And Luke records the moment with a precision the other gospel writers do not match. As he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. As he was praying, not after, not because he finished and God responded, during. The transfiguration does not happen because Jesus climbs the mountain. It happens while he is in conversation with the Father. The glory breaks through the ordinary while the prayer is still happening, as if the face Jesus normally walks around with in the world is only possible because he is restraining something, holding it back out of ordinary mercy so that the people around him are not obliterated by what he actually is. And in the prayer, on the mountain, in the dark, the restraint briefly releases. Moses and Elijah appear. They are talking with Jesus about his departure. Luke uses the word exodos, his exodus, his departure toward Jerusalem, toward the cross, toward the event that will split history in two. Two of the greatest figures in the entire history of Israel are discussing the crucifixion with Jesus on a mountain while his disciples sleep through it. The sleeping disciples, again. Peter and James and John fell asleep while Jesus was transfigured in glory 30 feet away. They woke up in time to see the end of it. Moses and Elijah departing, the cloud descending, a voice from inside the cloud saying, "This is my son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." And then it is over. And Jesus is standing there, looking ordinary again. This keeps happening. The disciples sleep through the prayer. They arrive at the end of it. They see the aftermath, but not the thing itself. Because the thing itself, the conversation on the mountain, The exchange in the dark is not for observers. It is between the Son and the Father. Which brings us to the question the whole first half of this video has been building toward. What does Jesus actually hear in those nights of prayer? This is one of the most honest questions you can ask about the Gospels, and it deserves an honest answer. The text is almost completely silent about this. We have the prayers of Jesus recorded at considerable length. The high priestly prayer in John 17 runs for 26 verses. Gethsemane is recorded in all three synoptic Gospels. Fragments of prayer are scattered across all four Gospels.
We know what Jesus says. We have almost no record of what the Father says back.
Except in 3 moments. And these 3 moments tell us everything we need to know about what Jesus is going into the dark to receive. The first is at the Jordan River, at his baptism, before a single miracle, before a single sermon, before he has done anything in public ministry at all. A voice from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." The affirmation does not come after a successful ministry campaign. It comes before the ministry begins. God speaks his love over his Son before the Son has done anything to earn it. The second is on the mountain at the Transfiguration, the one the disciples slept through most of. A voice from the cloud, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." Identity confirmed at the midpoint of the ministry, when Jerusalem is beginning to appear on the horizon and the shadow of the cross is starting to fall across the road. At the exact moment when everything is about to get harder, the Father speaks the name again. The third is in John 12. Jesus is speaking publicly, and he prays, "Father, glorify your name." A voice from heaven answers, "I have glorified it, and will glorify it again." The crowd hears it. Some say it sounds like thunder. Some say an angel has spoken. And Jesus says something that should stop you cold. "This voice was for your benefit, not mine. Not mine." He already knew what the voice said. He heard it before the crowd did, which means in every night of prayer where no voice is recorded, in every dark mountain and solitary place where the text simply says he prayed and we have no transcript, he already knew. He was not going into the dark waiting for new information. He was going into the dark to be with the one who had already said the only thing that mattered. "You are my Son. I love you. I am pleased with you." John 5:19. Jesus says it himself, in broad daylight. The Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever Jesus sees and hears from the Father, the vision that makes the ministry possible, the communion that makes the giving sustainable, it happens somewhere. In the night prayers, on the mountains, in the solitary dark. That is where he sees what the Father is doing. The Hebrew Psalm 62 uses a word for the silence before God that has no good English equivalent. Dumiyah, usually translated as silence or rest, but it does not mean empty silence. It does not mean the absence of sound. Dumiyah is a waiting that is full rather than hollow, a stillness that is not vacant but saturated. Truly my soul finds rest in God, finds Dumiyah. My salvation comes from him. That is what Jesus goes into the night to find. Not an empty dark, a full one. But there is one more night prayer, the hardest one. The one where the fullness of the dark does not feel full at all, where the silence feels for the first time like it might just be silence. And what Jesus does with that night will ask you more than anything else in this video. The garden is familiar. John tells us Jesus came here often with his disciples, the Garden of Gethsemane, on the western slope of the Mount of Olives, a place of olive trees and stone, and the particular quiet of a hillside above a sleeping city. He has prayed here before. He knows the ground. He knows the dark. He has spent more nights than anyone has counted in solitary places exactly like this one, in the same posture, in the same conversation with the same Father who has always been there. Tonight is different. Not the posture, not the place, not the conversation. What is different is that tonight, for the first time in all the recorded night prayers of Jesus, we have a prayer that does not produce what the one who prays it is asking for. Every other night on a mountain, the night before the 12, the night after the 5,000, the Transfiguration prayer, something comes out of them. A decision made with courage, a miracle that defies physics, glory that breaks through the ordinary. But tonight Jesus falls on his face in the dirt of a garden he knows well, and he asks his father for something, and the answer is no. Or rather, the answer is silence. My father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. He goes back to the disciples. He finds them sleeping. He returns to the garden, falls again, same words, a third time, same garden, same dirt, same prayer rising out of him in the dark while the city sleeps, and the torches of the arresting party are already moving through the streets below.
Luke tells us an angel appeared and strengthened him. Not the answer he asked for, strength to endure what he asked to be spared. The angel does not arrive with a message that the cup will pass. The angel arrives with enough to keep going, just enough, the minimum necessary to stand up and walk toward what is coming. And Jesus rises. He gets up from the dirt of Gethsemane, wakes his sleeping disciples, and walks toward the gate, toward the torches, toward Judas, toward the name he chose at dawn after a full night of prayer on a different mountain years before. He does not rise because the silence has been broken. He does not rise because the cup has been removed or the prayer has been answered the way the prayer asked. He rises because in 33 years of night prayers and mountain silences and solitary dark places, he has learned something about the silence of the Father that the rest of us are still trying to understand. The silence is not absence. Stay with me here, because this is the heart of everything this video has been building toward. The Father had already spoken. At the Jordan River, before the ministry began, "You are my son. I love you. I am well pleased with you." At the mountain of transfiguration, when the cross was just beginning to cast its shadow over the road ahead, "This is my son, whom I have chosen." And in John 12, publicly, before a crowd who heard it as thunder, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." 3 times. The Father has spoken 3 times on record, and every time the content is the same. Not instructions, not a strategy, not a detailed plan for how to navigate the next difficult season, just this: "You are mine. I see you. I am with you. What you are doing means something that will last." By the time Jesus arrives in Gethsemane, those words have been spoken. They cannot be unspoken. They are already in him, already permanent, already the ground he is standing on, even when the ground feels like it is giving way. The silence of the Father in Gethsemane is not the silence of a God who has turned away. It is the silence of a Father who has already said everything, and whose presence, even wordless, even in a garden where the answer to the petition is no, is still more than enough to stand up from. The writer of Hebrews captures this with a precision that should stop you. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard. He was heard. Not answered the way the petition asked, not spared the cup, but heard. The prayer went somewhere. The cry landed somewhere. The Father received it, held it, and responded. Not with the removal of the suffering, but with the presence that made the suffering survivable. This is what Jesus heard in the silence of Gethsemane. Not a new word, the same word, spoken before the world began, held in the permanent architecture of who the Father is toward the Son. "You are mine. I love you. I am with you." And the silence of that night is not the contradiction of that word. It is the context in which that word is most fully tested and most fully proven. He rose and walked toward the cross. Now the pattern completes. In Capernaum, after the most successful evening of healing in his ministry, he gets up in the dark and goes to a solitary place because what he draws from determines what he can give. The crowd wants more. He goes to the source. Before the 12, he spends the entire night on a mountain because some decisions cannot be made in the noise of the day. The morning will bring 12 names, including one that will cost him everything. He goes into the dark anyway. He comes out at dawn with the courage to speak all 12. After the 5,000, he sends everyone away and climbs a mountain alone because the momentum of the miracle is not the same as the mission, and he knows the difference, and the difference requires
the dark. He comes down and walks on the water because what you receive in the night is sufficient for whatever the water demands. During the transfiguration, he takes 3 disciples up a mountain to pray, and while he is praying, the restraint releases and his face becomes what it has always been. And a voice from inside a cloud names him again in front of witnesses, so that 2 sleeping disciples wake in time to hear the only testimony that ultimately matters. And in Gethsemane, he goes one more time to the familiar ground and the familiar dark and the familiar posture, and he asks the one thing he has never asked before. And the answer is the silence of a father who has already spoken and whose presence is the answer. And he rises. He always rises. This is what 33 years of night prayer produces. Not a man who is never afraid. Not a man who has achieved perfect spiritual equilibrium. Not a man for whom the dark holds no weight. A man who goes into the dark, knowing what he will find there. Not necessarily answers, not necessarily the resolution of the petition, but the one thing that makes every other thing possible, the presence of the Father. Augustine wrote something in his Confessions that the church has returned to in every generation since. Our heart is restless until it rests in God. He did not write this as a theological proposition. He wrote it at the end of a long, dark season of running and philosophy and restlessness that ended not with information, but with encounter. Not with answers, but with presence. The restlessness ended not because the questions were resolved, but because the one who holds the questions was found. That is what Jesus models in every night prayer recorded in the Gospels. He does not go into the dark to get things from the Father. He goes into the dark to be with him. And out of that being, out of that communion, that Dumiyah, that full silence, everything else comes. The 12 named at dawn, the water walked at the 4th watch, the glory that breaks through a praying face on a mountain, the courage to rise from Gethsemane and walk toward the cross. All of it, from the dark, from the silence, from the presence of the one who had already said the only thing worth saying, and whose saying of it was sufficient for everything. There are 3 things I want you to carry out of this. The first is this: Jesus never sustained the ministry from the crowds. He sustained it from the dark. What you draw from determines what you can give. If you are trying to sustain your life, your work, your relationships, your faith from the visible and the noisy and the immediate, from the results and the momentum and the energy of whatever is working right now, you will run out. He knew this. The withdrawal was not weakness. It was the source. The mountain in the dark was not where he escaped the ministry. It was where the ministry came from. The second is this: what you hear in the silence of prayer is almost never new information. It is almost always the oldest truth, repeated in a new darkness. Jesus did not go into the night prayers looking for something he did not have. He went to be with the one who had already given him everything. You are mine. I love you. I am with you. If you have sat in what felt like an empty silence, if you have prayed and heard nothing and wondered if the line was even connected, what Jesus models in Gethsemane suggests that the silence is not empty. The oldest word is still in it. The presence is already there. The Father received the prayer, held it, heard it, even when the answer to the petition is different from what you asked. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with longest: the night is not when God goes quiet. It is when everything else finally does. The crowds go home. The disciples fall asleep. The momentum settles, and the to-do list stops, and the noise that fills every waking hour goes still. And in that stillness, the Dumiyah, the full silence that is not hollow but saturated, the oldest voice speaks the oldest word into the most specific darkness you are currently in. You are mine. I love you. I am with you. That is what Jesus heard in the silence. Not because the night prayers were the only time God was speaking, but because the night was the only time everything else stopped long enough to hear him. If you have not found that silence yet, if the nights in your life are filled with the noise that the days could not fit in, this is the invitation. Not a technique, Not a spiritual discipline to add to an already crowded routine. Just this. What would it cost you to go somewhere dark and quiet and wait long enough to hear what has already been said? He went up the mountain alone. He came down carrying something that nothing in the daylight could produce. You are invited to the same mountain. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words, "in the dark." Just that. And if you know someone in a season of silence right now, someone who has been praying and hearing nothing and wondering if the silence means God has gone somewhere, share this with them. Because the silence Jesus experienced in Gethsemane was not the silence of an absent father. It was the presence of one who had already spoken. And that presence was enough to raise him from the dirt of a garden and walk him toward everything that was coming. It is still speaking in the dark. We will see you in the next one.